Bioshock is quite possibly the closest thing to a perfect game we will ever receive. One thing to clarify, however, by perfect, I don't mean flawless. No game is flawless. To be a suitable candidate for my particular kind of perfection, the game has to be of a certain standard of quality or more. My particular type of perfection is when gameplay reflects and feeds into the story, and the story reflects and feeds into the gameplay, which Bioshock does amazingly well. The Atom and Plasmid system, which is basically Bioshock's version of magic, allowing the player character to do things like summon swarms of insects from their hands, being central to the plot of Bioshock and the Fall of Rapture, where Bioshock takes place. So, why is gameplay being justified by the story such a good thing? Well, take the Uncharted series as an example. If there was some sort of attempt to integrate regenerating health into the narrative, that would have massively increased my immersion. It worked for Crysis. The reason you can regenerate health in Crysis is that you have a super nanosuit, and the nanosuit is both central to the gameplay and the story. If Resident Evil justified why the super cool elite special operatives had all the mobility of your mother after stuffing herself full of sailors last night, then maybe I would have enjoyed those games more and wouldn't have felt the need to write such a derogatory sentence. Now, it's at this point that some of you must be thinking, but Yeeticus 7, it's never justified why Jack can carry all his weapons at once, so why is it okay that Bioshock has unjustified mechanics? Well, that's where we get into the game part of a perfect game. I don't expect everything to be held to hyper-realistic standards. Hell, as much as I love Red Dead Redemption 2, it shows that there is such a thing as too much realism. After all, 6 seconds to search a corpse does start to grate on the nerves after a while when there can be as many as 30 corpses in one shootout. There have to be certain allowances for the fact that it is a video game. So why do I hate Uncharted's regenerating health or Resident Evil's tanky controls? Because they aren't fun. Ducking behind cover waiting for the strawberry jam to go away, and wasting all your ammunition because you just can't seem to hit that zombie's head isn't fun. But Yeeticus! In Resident Evil, the controls are bad to make you feel powerless. Then don't make your protagonist a super soldier, which sets up the expectations that your character will be able to handle a gun slightly better than the Titanic handles icebergs. In Bioshock, switching between weapons works because it's enjoyable and makes sense gameplay-wise. Which brings me to one of the main aspects of Bioshock's gameplay, the guns. You have a wrench, a pistol, a machine gun, a shotgun, a grenade launcher, a crossbow, and a chemical thrower. Basically a flamethrower. On the surface, it's your fairly standard shooter weapons, but each gun has separate ammo types which deal more damage based on what type of enemy you're shooting at, making the gunplay a bit more involved than in the majority of shooters. Each of these weapons comes with cool sound effects and does a decent amount of damage no matter the difficulty setting. This makes the guns satisfying to shoot. Most of the weapons also have that visceral kick when you fire it. They recoil so that you can see how powerful each weapon is based on the impact the weapon has on your character while firing it. I'll fire each weapon so you can see what I'm talking about. Also, while not technically being a weapon, you have a research camera which allows you to study each enemy type by taking photos of the enemy. Depending on the quality of the photo, the game will award you a score for the picture. Each score gives you progress to a certain tier of combat bonuses against the enemy. The higher the score, the more progress. It's not a major mechanic of the game. Every part of the camera other than getting it is completely optional. But it's a nice way of implementing getting more powerful throughout the game without a leveling system. The guns and the camera are all executed well enough that they could carry a game by themselves. But aside from the steampunk design fitting with the general aesthetic of the game, there isn't much. interactive storytelling in the shooting mechanics other than the design of the weapons fitting with Bioshock's steampunk aesthetic. It may seem odd to some that a main aspect of Bioshock doesn't have the very thing that I'm praising Bioshock for, but expecting interactive storytelling to be present in every aspect of a game, even a main aspect, is too much. And until some game shows me it's even possible to have interactive storytelling in every single element of a game, I won't expect even a perfect game to be held to that obscene standard. Okay, so if you haven't played Bioshock, would you kindly do so now? Because I will be going into story spoilers and all that juicy stuff. The real interesting game mechanic that elevates Bioshock above practically every other game I've ever played is Adam. Now, I want to separate Adam into two parts: how Adam affects the gameplay of Bioshock, and how Adam reflects the story of Bioshock. Adam, consumed in the form of plasmids, gives the protagonist supernatural powers in their offhand, such as shooting electricity, Thanos snapping fire onto enemies, and firing wintry blasts to freeze it. The plasmids are mainly used to supplement the shooting mechanics and set up interesting combinations of attacks. For example, you could waste all your ammunition on a mini-boss and struggle through the next firefight, or you could use the extra exciting options offered by the plasmids to make the mini-boss your ally and get him to clear out the next room and finish the mini-boss after he's been damaged. The plasmids add that extra layer onto the gameplay that take it from a fairly solid atmospheric shooter to one of the best games I've ever played. Figuring out the most effective way to use the plasmid combinations was an essential part of the gameplay. During my playthroughs, I got hooked on Adam. Every shooter game I played afterwards was lesser because as much as I loved games like Metro 2033, and they wouldn't really have benefited from the addition of something like Adam and the plasmid system, I couldn't help the little niggling thought in the back of my head. Come on, man. You'd be having more fun if you were playing Bioshock right now. But that's only how Adam affects the gameplay of Bioshock. How Adam affects a story is equally interesting. So, for those of you that may not remember, or those of you who ignored the spoiler warning, I'm just going to give a brief summary of the story with relation to Adam. So, after Andrew Ryan, a super wealthy business dude, moved to America, grew tired of people benefiting undeservedly from government coddling, Roosevelt's New Deal, he used his obscene wealth to build Rapture, an underwater capitalist utopia. For a while, Ryan's idea worked. Rapture prospered and grew until Tenenbaum discovered Adam in a species of underwater sea slugs. Adam gave Tenenbaum the ability to alter human genetic code. Eventually, Dr. Yi Suchong got a hold of Adam and created plasmids, which gave people superhuman powers. Rapture became dependent on Adam and plasmids, requiring it to function. But there wasn't enough Adam to go around. This created the Splicers, citizens of Rapture who had been driven mad by their addiction to Adam. Now, I didn't do the intricacies of Bioshock's story justice with that small explanation, but it's enough to show how instrumental Adam was to Rapture and to the plot of Bioshock. You get to see how addictive Adam is yourself, because, frankly, it's really friggin' fun to use. And in my survival difficulty playthrough, I was dependent on the Adam-created plasmids to scrape by in the more difficult enemy encounters. Maybe this was totally unintentional from the developers, and I'm reading way too much into this, but I'm still gonna give them credit for Adam and the plasmids being so flawlessly integrated with the main plot, driving along encounters with Steinman, a surgeon driven mad by how much Adam allowed him to alter the human body, and Sander Cohen, an artist whose sanity fell along with the rise of Adam addiction and the fall of Rapture. Adam and plasmids are also integral to the gameplay, with the plasmids allowing you to use the forces of wind to ragdoll your enemies, send physics props flying at your attackers, and lay traps for unaware splicers. The integration of gameplay elements and story structure is exactly what elevates Bioshock from one of my favorite games of all time to a perfect game. And I'm more than happy to say that Bioshock's world is one of the best I have ever had the privilege of playing in. as well as the plot being amazing, but we'll dissect that later. Bioshock's world is absolutely dripping with atmosphere. Like your mother after the night with the sailors. The atmosphere is eerie and at times even frightening, helped in no small part by the soundtrack. I love it. I don't usually talk about soundtracks, but Bioshock's is amazing. Over 2 hours worth of music, and I've listened to pretty much all of it. I haven't found a single bad track. You've been listening to the tracks all throughout this video. Pieces vary from this intense orchestral music to a hair-raising track that complements some of the more horror-based parts. But no matter how different the tracks may be, most of them have this undertone of madness beneath the beautiful outer layer, hinting at something just below the surface, ready to break out at any moment. And when it's not an undertone of madness, the insanity is so overt in the music that it's really impossible to miss. The piece that exemplifies this the most, I think, is Cohen's Prelude. By itself, it's this maddeningly fast track that stands on its own as a good piece of music, but how it's used in the game is absolutely amazing. It's why I think Sander Cohen is the best minor antagonist in Bioshock. And, speaking of antagonists, the Big Daddies and the Little Sisters. Whoever came up with the Big Daddies design deserves a raise. These massive lumbering beasts protecting these warped versions of children. Their moans are usually heard before you see them, and Christ is it memorable. When I first heard the moans, I thought of whales. Which begs the question, are the Big Daddies even human? Why do the moans sound so sad? Can they feel anything as you mercilessly cut them down and take the atom from the Little Sisters? While Bioshock does answer some questions, Big Daddies are amazing because of how much was left unanswered. They're these tragic figures shambling around the level. The Big Daddies act as the guardians to the Little Sisters, meaning if you want enough atom to be able to buy plasmids, you'll need to kill the Big Daddies to get it. Easier said than done, but if you do, you'll be able to either harvest the Little Sisters, killing them in the process but netting you more atom, or rescue them, undo the corruption, and turn the Little Sisters back into normal children. Small aside here, you can't just straight up kill the Little Sisters either, but I love that Bioshock has an in-game explanation for why you can't kill them. According to Dr. Suchong, each Little Sister is virtually indestructible because whenever they're damaged, almost immediately, the destroyed cells are replaced by unstable stem cell. I love the fact that the righteous path of rescuing Little Sisters is harder, but I do wish Bioshock would have committed to the ugly reality of walking the righteous path, that not only is it harder, but also less rewarding. For every 3 Little Sisters you rescue, you get a gift of atom, and I did the math. Even though harvesting the Little Sisters gets you more atom in the short term, rescuing the Little Sisters actually gets you more atom in the long run. Which is a shame, too, because I enjoyed struggling through those earlier levels before I got my first gift of atom, knowing that I was doing the right thing but struggling on nonetheless because of that knowledge. Yeah, stupid Bioshock, insisting on being consistent with real life. Child murder is bad. That's how the Little Sisters and the Big Daddies are represented through gameplay, and in keeping with the consistent tone I've tried to set up, let's move on to how they impact the story. The Little Sisters are the purest representation of the fall of Rapture and the depth of the addiction to Adam. Corrupting something as pure and sacred as childhood in order to satisfy the need for Adam, enough so that Andrew Ryan was willing to kidnap children from their mothers to make more Little Sisters. The Little Sisters and Big Daddies are essential components of Bioshock's dark, eerie atmosphere, and are a huge reason why Bioshock scared me more than some horror games. But Lamau, who cares about any of that? I need that atom to buy some penis enlargement plasmid, losers. I think that joke was all the horror we needed this year. Which provides a nice segue into my next section, how Bioshock executes on this amazing atmosphere they've created. The part that has always stood out to me feels like it was ripped straight out of a horror game. It was the introduction to the Spider Splicer. little detail shows that it isn't your world. You're the intruder. Bioshock's world feels bigger than you. It's lived in. It's a society that's been warped by its history and the power struggles that took place. And you've arrived after the parties to piece together what exactly happened to this city. And while you're exploring this vast, ruined world and you imagine what it would have been like before the fall of this once great society, I realized, holy crap, this place used to be awe-inspiring. And now look at it. It's the shell of a society. No inhabitants except for those driven completely mad. Just like Dark Souls! It used to be a utopia, but now this is just a world of corrupted ideals. And not the, oh, I must destroy the world to save it, or any other type of ridiculous Bond villain logic, but actual ideals. And Bioshock communicates its central idea to you during its first moment. I love this intro so gosh dang much. It's so powerful, and there's such a massive build up to the city of Rapture with the plane crash, the swim to the lighthouse, and finally, a pitch black room. And when all the lights come on, bam! Andrew Ryan's face with the quote, "No gods or kings, only man." The central ideology of Rapture established right off the bat. And from there you just dive down to a rabbit hole of madness, excess, and obsession. It's really cool. Someone that seems exempt from this madness is Andrew Ryan. I love pretty much all the characters in Bioshock, but in particular, I love Andrew Ryan. He has believable motivations, he isn't just a caricature of an actual person. He's fairly well defined even when you just meet him during the story, not even mentioning the added context that the audio diaries bring. You get to learn enough of his past life that you can see the logical progression of events that led to Ryan building Rapture. He was born in Russia, where he saw the Bolsheviks. For anyone that doesn't know, Bolshevism is basically the lime Diet Coke of communism, gain power. Ryan, after seeing the Bolsheviks run his family's business into the ground, determined that whenever the parasites, such as the Bolsheviks, take control of a society, they destroyed it. From there, Ryan moved to America and realized that there was no escape from those he dubbed the parasites, until Ryan built Rapture. Well, I didn't personally agree with Ryan. I couldn't deny that his motivations were somewhat reasonable. They might even resonate with some people. Granted, building an underwater city is rather eccentric, but nevertheless, through collecting audio diaries and paying attention to some of the other context clues Ryan gave me, I realized Andrew Ryan wasn't just the main bad guy for most of Bioshock. It feels like he had a life outside the main story, and that's why I love Andrew Ryan as a villain. Writers seem to forget that while Bond defeating whatever scoundrel of the month comes up is cool, Bond villains don't exist in real life. Sure, Andrew Ryan does a few over-the-top things like gas Langford, but it's because doing such ridiculous and over-the-top things is within the framework of Andrew Ryan's believable character that I love him so much. Villains are just characters whose experiences bring them in opposition to the protagonist. They're not a glorified MacGuffin for the hero to overcome, and having somewhat believable motivations is a courtesy rarely afforded to villains in general, much less video game villains. Which is why Andrew Ryan stands out so much in my memory. Alright, if I still haven't sold you on how awesome Andrew Ryan is, let me put it this way. Andrew Ryan made getting killed seem like an alpha move. The other main villain of Bioshock is still cool, and somewhat of a believable character. He is still a half-decent villain, and people love him for the reveal that Atlas was Fontaine the whole time. But if you take away the reveal, what's left of Fontaine? He was an orphan who ran away to join the theater at a very young age, where he learned how to influence and deceive people. He eventually took control of a bar where he overheard a rumor about Andrew Ryan pouring his ludicrous wealth into some deep-sea operation. Frank Fontaine found out about Rapture and then began sending flattering letters to Andrew Ryan in an attempt to be invited down to Rapture. When Frank Fontaine got to Rapture, he started a company that sold atom and plasmids called Fontaine Futuristics. Eventually, as Ryan began to sense Frank Fontaine as a threat, Fontaine started to feel cornered. Then he stole Ryan's son and created Jack, starting the events of the whole Bioshock game. Sure, Fontaine has a character, and it's not bad either. But at the end of the day, Frank Fontaine is no more than a grifter who is way out of his depth. Oh, that was bad. That was bad. I'm probably going to cut that out. Interesting, but when stacked alongside Andrew Ryan, Fontaine feels fleeting and forgettable. To be honest, I find the two minor villains, J.S. Steinman and Sander Cohen, to be much more interesting. Steinman considers himself to be a perfectionist, but frankly, most self-respecting artists would. Hell, calling me any type of artist would be a stretch, and I still rewrote this review at least 3 separate times before finally feeling comfortable with how it turned out. So maybe that's why I find Steinman to be so interesting. In his pursuit of perfection, Steinman went completely, utterly, stark, raving mad. Steinman is a believable ideal taken to its most extreme. After realizing the potential of atoms, Steinman started to become obsessed with the idea of symmetry, forcing it on his patients, horribly mutilating them in the name of beauty. These mutilations usually result in death. Steinman isn't given as much character development as Andrew Ryan, but I find him interesting for what he represents rather than what he is. And frankly, the build-up to the fight with Steinman is fantastic. I especially love the hallway leading up to his boss fight and the audio logs found there. It gives a great insight to his character, and well, I'll just play them for you all so you can see his descent into madness.
When Picasso became bored of painting people, he started representing them as cubes and other abstract forms. The world called him a genius. I've spent my entire surgical career creating the same tired shapes over and over again. The upturned nose, the cleft chin, the ample bosom. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could do with a knife what that old Spaniard did with a brush? I am beautiful, yes. Look at me. What could I do to make my features finer? With Adam and my scalpel, I have been transformed. But is there not something better? What if now it is not my skill that fails me, but my imagination? Just open your eyes, and when I see her, she cuts me into 1,000 beautiful pieces.
Now, Sander Cohen. Cohen was the artist for Andrew Ryan during Rapture's prime. As Rapture fell, so did Cohen. He went completely insane and holed himself up in Fort Frolic, which Andrew Ryan had given him complete control over. Frankly, he seems like a repeat of Steinman, but I'm not really complaining. I love Steinman, but still, something more than obsessive perfectionist driven mad by his work in Adam would have been nice. Don't get me wrong, Cohen is still well executed, creepy, and much gaudier and louder than Steinman. And kudos to whoever did the voice acting for Sander Cohen. At first when I met Cohen, I thought, oh wow, what a nice voice. Then I thought, are those corpses spinning from stripper poles? His soft-spoken persona is just a cover-up for his insanity. which manifests in throwing waves of splicers at you and sending you on a quest to kill his 4 evil ex-boyfriends, photograph their corpses, then put the photos in Cohen's masterpiece. In practically every corner of Fort Frolic, you could feel Cohen's personality and how it influenced Fort Frolic's aesthetic. Even more so, Cohen comments on your gameplay, making him that much more present and defining. Fort Frolic is Cohen's territory. In addition, there are some very minor characters who essentially come down to name splicers, but there isn't really enough meat for me to dive into their characters. If you are curious about some of the smaller characters and their roles in Bioshock, then just play the dang game, man! So, that's what I love about Bioshock. I considered doing a dissection of the world and talking about which makes each area great, but just in case this review made anyone want to go back and play Bioshock, do that. I decided not to, so you can experience it / replay it as fresh as possible. But, in fairness, no game is perfect, so let's go over some of the flaws in Bioshock. The hacking minigame. Yeah, that was the elephant in the room for the longest time. One of the main problems people have with Bioshock. And I can see why. It's kind of boring and mundane. But frankly, I don't mind it. After a particularly intense shootout with me just barely scraping by with that magic pixel of health left, the boring, mundane hacking minigame is exactly what I need to calm down. I understand why people hate it, but I just don't. Sorry. And the final boss. I mean, it's not bad. It's a video game final boss. Do the thing 3 times and then you win. You either get the good ending or the bad ending. It's not very good or creative. Sort of like if you went out to a restaurant and you had the best meal of all time. Just amazing in every way. And then you decided to order dessert. And they serve you a plate of Skittles. I mean, it's not bad or anything. And you're gonna eat it. But if the rest of the meal was so amazing, why was the last part so meh? So that's it. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. This is my first attempt at anything like this, so let me know if there's anything I can do to improve my style or editing. Thanks, and antios ti doriki. For those of you who don't speak Spartan, that's something like goodbye. I don't really know, to be honest.